The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Delhi International Airport as passengers hurried toward their gates. Among the crowd of travelers, Sarah Martinez moved with quiet confidence, her pilot's uniform crisp and professional. To most people rushing past, she appeared to be just another airline employee heading to work. Few would have guessed that the petite woman with kind eyes and a warm smile was actually Captain Sarah Martinez, one of the most experienced commercial pilots in the industry. Sarah had been flying for nearly 2 decades, accumulating over 15,000 flight hours across different aircraft types. She started her career as a flight instructor at a small airport in Texas, where she learned that flying wasn't just about technical skills, but about staying calm under pressure. Her colleagues respected her for her steady nerves and quick decision-making abilities, qualities that had earned her the position of senior captain at Global Airways. This particular Tuesday was supposed to be routine. Sarah was scheduled to captain flight GA847, a Boeing 777 bound for London Heathrow with 318 passengers and 12 crew members aboard. The flight manifest showed the usual mix of business travelers, families on vacation, and students heading back to university. Among them were elderly couples celebrating anniversaries, young professionals chasing career opportunities, and children excited about their first international trip. As Sarah conducted her pre-flight checks in the cockpit, she reviewed the weather reports and flight path. The meteorological data showed clear skies for most of the journey, with only minor turbulence expected over the Arabian Sea. Her co-pilot, First Officer James Kumar, was equally experienced and had flown this route dozens of times. Together, they formed a well-practiced team that passengers could trust with their lives. The boarding process proceeded smoothly, with gate agents scanning tickets and directing passengers to their seats. Flight attendants performed their safety demonstrations while Sarah completed final system checks. The aircraft's engines hummed with power as ground crew removed wheel chocks and prepared for pushback from the gate. At exactly 10:45 a.m. local time, Flight GA847 began its taxi toward the active runway. Sarah received clearance from air traffic control and smoothly accelerated down the runway, lifting the massive aircraft into the bright Delhi sky. The takeoff was textbook perfect, and within minutes, they were climbing steadily toward their cruising altitude of 37,000 feet. Passengers settled into their seats, some already reaching for their entertainment systems, while others gazed out the windows at the shrinking landscape below. Business travelers opened laptops to catch up on work. Families distributed snacks to restless children, and frequent flyers prepared for the long journey ahead. None of them could have imagined that their ordinary flight would soon become anything but routine. Sarah maintained radio contact with various air traffic control centers as they crossed into Pakistani airspace, then over the Arabian Sea. The flight was proceeding exactly according to schedule, with all systems functioning normally. She had no reason to suspect that in just a few hours, she would face the greatest challenge of her flying career and be forced to make decisions that would determine the fate of every person aboard her aircraft. 3 hours into the flight, passengers had settled into the rhythm of long-distance travel. The cabin service was running smoothly, with flight attendants serving meals and drinks while maintaining their professional demeanor. Children were watching animated movies, business travelers were typing away on their keyboards, and many passengers had drifted off to sleep, trusting in the steady hum of the engines to carry them safely to their destination. In the cockpit, Sarah was monitoring the aircraft's progress when her attention was drawn to an unusual communication from air traffic control. The controller's voice carried a tone of urgency that immediately put her on alert. Reports were coming in of severe weather developing rapidly along their planned route. But this wasn't ordinary turbulence or rain clouds. A massive volcanic eruption had occurred without warning on a remote island in the Arabian Sea. The volcano, which had been dormant for over a century, had suddenly exploded with tremendous force, sending enormous clouds of ash and debris high into the atmosphere. Volcanic ash posed an extreme danger to aircraft because it could damage engines, clog air filters, and reduce visibility to zero. The ash cloud was spreading rapidly across multiple flight paths, creating a no-fly zone that extended for hundreds of miles in every direction. Commercial aircraft were being diverted to emergency landing sites, but the situation was complicated by the fact that most nearby airports were either too small to handle large passenger jets or were already overcrowded with diverted flights. Sarah quickly consulted her charts and began calculating fuel consumption rates while discussing options with air traffic control. The original destination of London was no longer reachable due to the ash cloud's projected path. Alternative airports in the Middle East were reporting that they were at capacity and could not accept additional diversions. The situation was becoming critical, as fuel reserves would not allow for extended holding patterns or multiple diversion attempts. First Officer Kumar worked alongside Sarah to review emergency procedures and identify potential landing sites. They discovered that most conventional options were unavailable due to the widespread nature of the ash cloud and the already overwhelmed airport systems. The volcanic eruption had created a domino effect, disrupting air traffic across a vast region and stranding thousands of passengers at airports that simply couldn't accommodate everyone. As they analyzed their options, it became clear that they needed to think beyond standard protocols. The ash cloud was moving faster than initially predicted, and weather services were updating their forecasts every few minutes with increasingly dire warnings. Aircraft that had attempted to fly through even the edges of the volcanic ash were reporting engine problems and emergency landings. Sarah realized that conventional thinking wouldn't be enough to solve this crisis. With 330 lives depending on her decisions and fuel supplies diminishing, she needed to consider alternatives that most pilots would never contemplate. The training scenarios she had practiced throughout her career hadn't prepared her for a situation of this magnitude and complexity. She began to think about airports that might be overlooked by other pilots, places that could theoretically handle a Boeing 777, but weren't typically used for commercial international flights. The solution would require not just piloting skills, but also courage, creativity, and the willingness to take calculated risks when all conventional options had been exhausted. The passengers remained largely unaware of the developing crisis, continuing with their in-flight activities while Sarah and her crew worked frantically to find a safe haven for everyone aboard. The gravity of the situation became clear when Sarah received an emergency bulletin from the Aviation Authority. The volcanic ash cloud had expanded beyond all initial projections, creating a massive aerial hazard zone that stretched across multiple countries. Aircraft caught in similar situations were declaring emergencies and making forced landings at whatever airports could accommodate them, regardless of size or facilities. Sarah studied her navigation charts with intense focus, searching for any airport within their fuel range that might be capable of handling their Boeing 777. Traditional, commercial airports were either inside the danger zone or completely overwhelmed with diverted traffic. She needed to think differently, to consider facilities that weren't part of the normal commercial aviation network. Her eyes stopped on a marking that most commercial pilots would overlook entirely. It was a military airfield located on a strategic island in the Indian Ocean, used primarily for cargo operations and military transport. The runway was long enough for large aircraft, but it had never hosted a commercial passenger flight of this size. The facility wasn't equipped with the normal passenger services that airports provided, and landing there would require special permissions that could take hours to obtain through normal channels. Time was running out. Fuel calculations showed they had perhaps 90 minutes of flying time remaining, and the ash cloud was continuing to expand in their direction. Other aircraft in the region were already reporting engine problems and emergency situations. Sarah knew that waiting for official approval through standard bureaucratic processes could cost precious time and fuel that they simply didn't have. She made the decision that would define her career and potentially save hundreds of lives. Sarah contacted the military airfield directly, bypassing normal aviation protocols and speaking directly to the base commander. She explained the emergency situation, the number of passengers at risk, and the urgent need for landing permission. Her calm, professional manner and clear explanation of the crisis convinced the military officials to grant immediate emergency landing clearance. The base commander, Colonel Williams, had never dealt with a situation like this before. Military airfields were designed for cargo planes and fighter jets, not passenger aircraft filled with families and travelers. However, he recognized the life-threatening nature of the situation and agreed to mobilize his personnel to assist with the emergency landing and passenger care. Sarah altered course toward the military installation while briefing her crew about the unconventional landing site. The flight attendants would need to prepare passengers for a landing at a facility without normal airport amenities. There would be no jet bridges, no comfortable waiting areas, and no immediate connections to other flights. However, there would be safety, solid ground, and protection from the dangerous ash cloud that was making flight impossible across the region. The aircraft's fuel gauge showed reserves dropping steadily as they flew toward their new destination. Sarah carefully managed engine power and flight path to conserve every drop of fuel while maintaining safe flying speeds. There would be no opportunity for a second attempt if the first landing approach failed. As they approached the military airfield, Sarah could see it was unlike any airport her passengers had ever used. The base was primarily concrete and steel, designed for functionality rather than comfort. Military personnel were already scrambling to prepare for the unprecedented arrival of a commercial passenger flight, filled with civilians who had never expected to set foot on a military installation. As Flight GA-847 descended toward the military airfield, Sarah faced challenges she had never encountered in her years of commercial flying. The approach required precise navigation to avoid restricted airspace, while dealing with crosswinds that were stronger than those typically found at commercial airports. The runway, while long enough for the Boeing 777, was narrower than standard commercial runways and surrounded by military equipment and structures, rather than the clear zones found at civilian airports. Inside the cabin, passengers began to notice that something was different about their flight. The announcement that they would be making an unscheduled landing due to weather conditions caused murmurs of concern throughout the aircraft. Parents hugged their children closer. Business travelers checked their phones for news updates, and elderly passengers wondered aloud about the delay to their journey. Sarah's voice came over the intercom, calm and reassuring despite the complexity of the situation unfolding around them. She explained that they would be landing at a secure facility, where they would be safe while the volcanic ash situation was resolved. Her professional tone and confident manner helped ease passenger anxiety, though many still felt uncertain about what awaited them on the ground. The military base had transformed into a flurry of activity as personnel prepared for the arrival of hundreds of civilian passengers. Colonel Williams coordinated with his staff to clear hangar space for temporary shelter, arrange for food and water supplies, and establish communication systems that would allow passengers to contact their families. The base medical facility prepared to handle any passengers who might need assistance, and security teams established protocols for managing civilian visitors in a military environment. As Sarah lined up for the final approach, she could see military vehicles positioned along the runway and emergency crews standing by in case assistance was needed. The landing would require all of her skill and experience, as the approach angle was steeper than normal commercial procedures and the runway markings were different from those she was accustomed to reading. First Officer Kumar called out altitude and speed readings while monitoring the aircraft's systems during the critical descent phase. The flight attendants had secured the cabin and prepared passengers for landing, though many were still puzzled about why they were landing at what clearly appeared to be a military installation rather than a commercial. Airport Sarah executed a textbook landing, despite the challenging conditions, touching down smoothly on the military runway and bringing the massive aircraft to a controlled stop. The passengers burst into spontaneous applause, not fully understanding the complexity of what their captain had just accomplished, but recognizing that they had been delivered safely to solid ground. As the engines wound down, military personnel approached the aircraft with ground equipment and mobile stairs. Since the base lacked the jet bridges that passengers normally use to exit planes, Colonel Williams stood ready to welcome the unexpected guests and ensure their comfort during what would likely be an extended stay while the volcanic ash crisis was resolved. The passengers gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark, still uncertain about what they would find outside the aircraft but grateful to be safely on the ground. They had no idea that their pilot had just executed one of the most challenging emergency diversions in commercial aviation history, making split-second decisions that had saved hundreds of lives while avoiding a potential catastrophe in the dangerous skies above the Indian Ocean. The passengers of Flight GA-847 stepped off the aircraft into an environment unlike anything they had experienced during their travels. Instead of the familiar sights of a commercial airport terminal, they found themselves on a military airfield surrounded by aircraft hangars, radar installations, and uniformed personnel. The contrast was striking. but the warmth of the reception was immediate and genuine. Colonel Williams greeted each passenger personally as they descended the mobile stairs, his calm demeanor helping to ease the anxiety that many felt about their unexpected arrival at a military installation. Base personnel had worked quickly to set up temporary facilities in one of the large aircraft hangars, transforming the industrial space into a makeshift passenger terminal, complete with seating areas, refreshment stations, and communication centers. Military cooks had prepared hot meals using base facilities, while communication specialists established phone and internet connections so passengers could contact worried family members around the world. The contrast between the stark military environment and the caring hospitality provided by the base personnel created a unique atmosphere of security and comfort during an uncertain time. Sarah spent the first hours after landing coordinating with base officials and airline headquarters to assess the ongoing situation. The volcanic ash cloud continued to expand, and aviation authorities were grounding flights across an increasingly wide area. What had initially been expected to be a brief delay was clearly going to extend much longer, potentially days rather than hours. Passengers adapted to their unusual surroundings with remarkable resilience. Children were fascinated by the military aircraft visible through the hangar doors, while adults appreciated the efficiency and organization of the base personnel. The military environment, which might have seemed intimidating initially, proved to be incredibly well suited for managing large groups of people during emergency situations. As evening approached, base personnel set up sleeping areas using military cots and blankets, creating family sections and ensuring privacy where possible. The base medical facility provided care for passengers with chronic conditions who needed medication, while the kitchen staff worked around the clock to provide regular meals that accommodated various dietary requirements and cultural preferences. News reports began featuring the story of Flight GA-847 and the innovative solution that Captain Martinez had implemented to save her passengers from the volcanic ash crisis. Aviation experts praised her quick thinking and willingness to consider unconventional options when traditional approaches proved inadequate. The military base became a symbol of international cooperation and humanitarian assistance. During a natural disaster, passengers, who had initially been frustrated by the delay, began to understand the magnitude of the crisis they had avoided. Reports from other aircraft showed engine damage from volcanic ash exposure, emergency landings at overcrowded airports, and passengers stranded for days in inadequate facilities. The military base, despite its unconventional nature, was providing better care and accommodation than many traditional airports were able to offer during the crisis. Colonel Williams and his staff received commendations from their superiors for their handling of the unprecedented situation. The base had never hosted civilian passengers before, but their military training in logistics and emergency management proved invaluable in caring for the unexpected guests. The cooperation between military and civilian aviation authorities set a new precedent for handling large-scale aviation emergencies. Sarah worked closely with meteorologists and aviation authorities to monitor the ash cloud's movement and plan for the eventual continuation of their journey. Her passengers had come to trust her judgment completely, recognizing that her unconventional decision-making had protected them from a potentially dangerous situation while ensuring their comfort and safety during the extended delay. After 3 days at the military base, the passengers of Flight GA-847 had formed an unexpected community. Families from different countries shared meals together, business travelers helped elderly passengers with technology, and children played games that transcended language barriers. The crisis had brought together people who would never have met under normal circumstances, creating bonds that would last long after their journey ended. Sarah spent her time monitoring weather reports and coordinating with aviation authorities about when it would be safe to resume flight operations. The volcanic ash cloud was finally beginning to dissipate, but safety protocols required extensive testing to ensure that flight paths were completely clear before commercial aircraft could return to the skies. She worked closely with meteorologists and ash cloud specialists to understand exactly when and where it would be safe to fly. The international media attention surrounding their situation had grown considerably. News outlets around the world were covering the story of the quick-thinking pilot who had saved hundreds of passengers by landing at a military base. Aviation safety experts were analyzing Sarah's decision-making process, with many concluding that her actions represented a textbook example of crisis management and innovative problem-solving under pressure. Passengers, who had initially been concerned about missing important business meetings or family events, began to appreciate the extraordinary nature of their experience. They were witnessing firsthand how military and civilian organizations could work together during emergencies, and many expressed gratitude for the level of care they had received from people who had no obligation to help them but had done so with remarkable generosity. Colonel Williams had become something of a celebrity among the passengers, as his leadership and hospitality had made their stay as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. Base personnel had gone far beyond their normal duties to ensure passenger comfort, with some working extra shifts to maintain the temporary facilities, and others sharing their own recreation areas with the stranded travelers. On the fourth morning, Sarah received the news she had been waiting for. Meteorological services and aviation authorities had declared the flight paths clear of volcanic ash, and commercial aircraft were being cleared to resume operations in the region. However, the logistics of continuing their journey would be complex, as airports throughout the region were still dealing with backlogs from the crisis. Sarah coordinated with airline operations to plan their departure from the military base. The Boeing 777 had been inspected thoroughly by both military and civilian maintenance crews to ensure that no volcanic ash had affected the aircraft's systems during their stay. Fuel trucks arrived to top off the aircraft's tanks for the continuation of their journey to London. The passengers prepared to leave their temporary home with mixed emotions. While they were eager to reach their final destinations and reunite with family members, many had formed friendships during their stay and appreciated the unique experience they had shared. Children were particularly sad to leave the military base, having been fascinated by the aircraft and equipment they had been allowed to observe. Colonel Williams organized a farewell ceremony, thanking the passengers for their patience and cooperation during their stay. He presented Sarah with a base medallion in recognition of her outstanding airmanship and decision-making during the crisis. The passengers gave a standing ovation to both their captain and the military personnel who had cared for them. As they reboarded Flight GA-847, passengers carried with them not just their luggage, but also memories of an extraordinary experience that had shown them the best of human nature during a time of crisis. They had learned that sometimes the most unlikely places could provide exactly what was needed, and that heroes could be found in the most unexpected circumstances. The departure from the military base was an emotional experience for everyone involved. As Flight GA-847 taxied toward the runway, passengers pressed their faces to the windows to wave goodbye to the military personnel who had become their friends during the extended stay. Colonel Williams and his staff lined up along the taxiway, saluting the aircraft as it passed by in a display of mutual respect and appreciation. Sarah executed another flawless takeoff, lifting the Boeing 777 back into clear skies for the final portion of their journey to London. The passengers, who had initially been strangers sharing a routine flight, were now bonded by their shared experience of survival, community, and unexpected hospitality. Many exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch and perhaps reunite for future gatherings. The flight to London proceeded without incident, with passengers reflecting on their extraordinary detour. Business travelers realized that their delayed meetings had been insignificant compared to the life-threatening situation they had avoided. Families appreciated how the crisis had brought them closer together and shown them the kindness of strangers. Children drew pictures of the military base and the aircraft they had seen, creating artwork that would remind them of their adventure for years to come. When Flight GA-847 finally touched down at London Heathrow, the passengers received a hero's welcome. Media representatives were waiting to interview Sarah and hear first-hand accounts from passengers about their experience. The story had captured international attention as an example of exceptional airmanship and the importance of thinking creatively during emergency situations. Aviation authorities conducted a thorough review of Sarah's decision-making process during the crisis. Their analysis concluded that her actions had been not only appropriate, but exemplary, representing the highest standards of pilot training and emergency management. The case was added to aviation training curricula as an example of how experienced pilots should respond when conventional solutions are inadequate. Sarah was honored with multiple awards from aviation organizations, including the International Airline Pilots Association's highest recognition for exceptional airmanship. However, she consistently emphasized that the successful outcome had been the result of teamwork involving her crew, air traffic controllers, military personnel, and the passengers themselves, all of whom had contributed to managing the crisis effectively. The passengers of Flight GA847 maintained their connections long after their journey ended. They organized annual reunions, created a social media group to share updates about their lives, and established a scholarship fund to support aviation education in honor of Captain Martinez and Colonel Williams. Their experience had transformed a group of strangers into a lasting community, united by their shared adventure. Years later, the story of Flight GA847 continued to inspire aviation professionals and travelers around the world. Sarah's decision to land at the military base had saved 330 lives and demonstrated that sometimes the most unconventional solutions could be the most effective. The volcanic ash crisis had been a natural disaster, but it had also revealed the extraordinary capacity for human cooperation and innovation when lives are at stake. The military base where they had found refuge was eventually upgraded to handle civilian aircraft during emergency situations, with Colonel Williams leading the development of protocols for assisting diverted commercial flights. The facility became a model for military-civilian cooperation during aviation emergencies, with other countries adopting similar programs. Sarah continued her career as a commercial pilot, carrying with her the knowledge that she had successfully navigated one of the most challenging situations any pilot could face. Her passengers never forgot that she had been far more than just another traveler in uniform. When crisis hit, she had proven herself to be exactly the kind of captain every passenger hopes to have but prays they will never need. Her quick thinking, professional expertise, and willingness to consider unconventional solutions had turned a potential tragedy into a story of survival, community, and the triumph of human ingenuity over natural disaster.